we don't understand what biological aging is at enough resolution to know how to measure it. There is no way to measure biological age. What you can do is estimate it a lot of different ways. I would suggest that what's more important is your current health status and your quality of life than your biological age. And we can talk more about what the existing clocks are actually measuring, but they're not measuring biological age. They're correlated to something that's correlated to biological age. So it may be the wrong question. I think it's useful to talk about biological age, and in some ways, telling people you can measure biological age is useful because it gets people to understand the concept of biological age and that it's different from chronological age, or can be. But it also misleads people into thinking we can do something that we aren't currently able to do.
Well, I would agree with Matt. First, we don't have a definition of biological age. So we use biological age as a proxy, as something which can, general public can identify to. Because if you give them 25 complex numbers which they don't understand, they will not use them. And then if you tell them, look, there is something we can call biological age, which can be defined in many different ways. And then you did a lifestyle intervention, like, you lost weight or you stopped smoking, and then your biological age improved. This is a very good motivator for people to stick to difficult decisions, like, not eating too much or being physically active. So I do think that having a tool to monitor yourself in a different way than just looking at the mirror or standing on a scale can be helpful, but we have to be careful in interpreting it because, the question is, how do you define biological age?
Yeah, I think we kind of have a definition, but only in a sort of abstract way that, really leads to the conclusions that both of you have just said. I would say that we can certainly say that aging is the accumulation of molecular and cellular damage in the body that eventually overwhelms the body's ability to maintain full function, and function declines. So what that means is that if you take a person who is late enough in life that their function is actually going downhill, and if you've got some kind of measure of what that function used to be, then you can call that biological age. But of course, what we really want is to have measures that can be applied before then, so that one can get an idea of how soon one's likely to start going downhill. And there we need, essentially, we can define biological age as simply the amount of damage that your body has so far got, but measuring that is basically impossible. What you can only measure is things that correlate with it, that are kind of readouts of that accumulation of damage. So, and of course, then one has to take into account the fact that the damage will be, in many ways, accumulating non-uniformly, so that some organs, some tissues, some systems may be closer to the threshold of starting to go downhill than others are. So yeah, it's a really complicated, messy thing. But, of course, our goal here is to identify ways to get the general public to have a sufficient understanding of how to assess their biological age so that they will be able to make sensible decisions about, trade-offs of what they should give up, what they should start doing that they might otherwise not do, things like that.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is I think Aubrey said something really important there about function. I think we have very good tools to measure things that are predictive of organ function, tissue function right now. I think also what Aubrey said is optimally, we'd love to be able to predict in advance of any functional decline whether or not an intervention is going to preserve function longer. We can't really do that yet, but we can measure many different biomarkers of function in different organs and tissues right now that are really good, like VO2 max, grip strength, agility, insulin sensitivity, markers of cardiovascular function, right? You can do this for every tissue and organ, cognitive assessments, right? The problem is we don't have one thing. People want one thing to measure, right? And one number. And we can talk about the things that exist that are marketed that way. They aren't actually doing what they're claimed to be doing. But in a clinical setting, we do have very good biomarkers. And I think this is part of the myth, right? That you'll sometimes, I'll present the case, I think, for why these quote unquote biological aging clocks should not be used in clinics today. And clinicians will agree with the logic of that, and then they're like, but we don't, what do we use?
Yeah.
I'm like, we've got all sorts of biomarkers that are really good to use, and we should use those to assess current health status and future health risk instead of relying on something we don't really have validated understanding of how to use it in the clinic at this point. And I'll let Gordan talk about glycan age, because that may be one where I think we have an opportunity to get there.
Okay.
And we can have a conversation about whether we're there yet. But I don't think we have a single test that sort of integrates all aspects of health and function at this point.
And just to say, Glycan Age has been more of a direct consumer product, but now you're moving more into the clinics. Is that right?
This is definitely our intention. So the Glycan Age is, so the way we determine the name of the Glycan Age company today is not the glycans which measure age, but it's the age of glycans. You know, we had a Stone Age, we had a Iron Age, we had a DNA age, which was maybe the last 15 years. We're looking into genes. And I think it's time to look into glycans, because glycans are the key of multicellular life.
What are glycans, by the way?
So glycans are modification of proteins, which mostly evolved when the life was becoming multicellular, when we had to have more functions than the number of genes we had. Because, you know, E. coli has 5,000 genes, human has 20,000 genes. We are not 4 times more complicated than the basic bacteria. We are millions of times more complicated. And to make this complexity structurally and informationally, glycosylation was developed. And majority of physiological systems are regulated by glycosylation. For example, immunoglobulin G, which is our major weapon of our immune system, can either promote inflammation or suppress inflammation, depending on what glycan you put on the same molecule. And it's a very complex decision of the immune system when they want to activate inflammation or suppress inflammation. And the majority of diseases of modern society are linked to high levels of low-grade systemic inflammation. So with too much inflammation through age, we develop metabolic diseases, we develop autoimmune, inflammatory, cardiovascular. Inflammation is behind all of them. And glycans are the key regulators one of the key regulators of inflammation. So what we do as our research is we try to understand how and why glycans regulate inflammation, how is this activated, how is it being shut down, what are the mechanistic aspects of that. And then out of our research, we made the ultimate simplification, which we call Glycan Age now, which is kind of a long-term measure of our ability to regulate, mostly to resolve inflammation. And this makes the Glycan Age a good tool because it's informative. What makes Glycan Age different from other biomarkers is that from the beginning, we are developing it as a clinical test. So our analytical accuracy is higher than any other routinely used clinical test. We are on the path to go through the regulatory approvals. Our first CE-IVDR, which is European way of regulating diagnostics test, is entering the market this year. We'll have CE-IVDR instruments. We'll have a fully validated test, which will not be for biological age. They will be for different applications where this type of analytics, meaning IgG glycan composition, which is measured by the Glycan Age as a test, can be predictive. Things like future heart attack and stroke have very good predictive power. We just have a few very strong papers showing prediction of mortality. So if this, which we will call probably the maybe glycan or resilience or something like that, we don't have a name for this clinical test that we'll have in the future. It will be a test which is measured in routine clinical laboratories under all the regulatory aspects which there are, and which will come with the clinical claims. So this will be a long path.
Thanks for watching this Beyond Tomorrow clip. If you haven't subscribed yet to our main channel, join us there for conversations that can help you thrive today and flourish tomorrow. We'll see you next time.